Hello, everyone. My name is Solome Tibabu, and I'm the host of the Going Digital Behavioral Health Tech Conference. I am so thrilled to introduce the co-founders of Cyclub here today, Representative Patrick Kennedy and Marjorie Morrison. Before we get started, how about each of you just give a brief introduction and then we'll dive right in.
Solome, it's great to be with you again. Thanks so much for spreading the word on mental health and its significance in the post-pandemic world, especially. So I had the honor of sponsoring the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act when I was in Congress. And since leaving Congress, I've spent most of my time advocating for its enforcement. But I'm so excited to be co-founder of Cyclub with Marjorie, because I really see Cyclub as tackling another layer of advocacy for mental health, and that is improving access to good quality mental health. And I know we'll get more into that as the podcast continues.
And I'm Marjorie Morrison, so I'm honored to have co-founded Cyclub with Patrick. I'm a psychotherapist by training, spent about a decade in private practice, so all this stuff is like very near and dear to me. And then spent some time working with the military and the Marines and writing proactive counseling. And then after that, I started Psych Armor, which is a nonprofit which does online education in the military veteran space. I learned a thing or two about online education and how we can really kind of upskill providers to learn about evidence-based practices. And then Patrick and I joined forces on Cyclub, and it's been a blast. It's been a great journey. And thank you for having me. Thank you for having us.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. So perhaps to set the stage, Representative Kennedy, can you share more about the amazing work you've done to advance parity in mental health?
Well, thanks, Solome. You know, we passed the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act in 2008, and it was very prescient that it was 2008, because if we hadn't, it probably would not have made it into the Affordable Care Act, which, of course, as you may recall, kind of got whittled down in the 11th hour in order to get it to pass. The payer world, frankly, was opposed to parity, but we had a good friend in Senator Chris Dodd, who was chairman of the Banking Committee, and he wrote the whole Economic Stabilization Act post the bank failures in 2008 into my bill, the HR 1424, the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act, thereby guaranteeing its passage because it was part of such a must-do piece of legislation. So we've had great advocacy, but it's really been by hook or by crook. And now I think we're going to see a much more broad general acceptance that this is in everyone's interest, and we can't just think it's going to happen on its own. We need to mobilize politically to ensure that we create more access because so many Americans are in need. And unfortunately, mental health has never been given the priority it deserves. And it's showing now because we've had a tough time meeting all the needs of our fellow Americans during this COVID process. And certainly going forward, we'll have that need increase. So the timing is right for advocacy. And I'm so thrilled to be joined by Marjorie, because she spent her life really improving just really the quality of mental health. And you know, I've been on the access side, and she's really been about improving quality. So I think we've got a good team here in Cyclub to try to improve both.
Yes, on that note, Marjorie, can you tell the audience, for those who aren't familiar, what is Cyclub?
So Cyclub is a platform of educational tools in behavioral health. And we have just different audiences for Cyclub, but we have educational materials for behavioral health providers, for healthcare clinicians, and just for everyday people. And inside each one of our hubs are different types of learning opportunities for different types of learners. So we have courses that when you take them stacked together, you can earn continuing education and certifications. We have short videos for people who just need to grab information quickly. We have podcasts for people who like to listen and go for a walk when they learn. We have a lot of text and articles and blogs for people that like to learn by reading. So really just a lot of different opportunities to learn all around mental health topics.
So Representative Kennedy, how does your work in advocacy tie into your work now with Cyclub?
Well, it's really important to increase access into more mental health, but it's also equally important to making sure that mental health will actually help get you better. Because part of the stigma of mental health is that, well, treatment doesn't really work. Well, in fact, treatment does work, and especially if it's evidence-based treatment. And unfortunately, to date, a lot of the treatment that is out there doesn't always follow clinical guidelines for what is the latest in evidence-based knowledge about treating a certain type of diagnosis. I'll let Marjorie talk about it more, but we've traditionally just had a one-size-fits-all kind of approach to mental health, and what Cyclub is trying to do is curate best practices to focus on kind of a specific modality of cognitive behavioral therapy for a specific diagnosis, and then matching those therapists who are trained and have proficiency in that treatment modality to those patients that they can help the most, who need that type of treatment.
Can you talk more about the significant difference that you hope to see with the providers that complete your training?
So we're very focused at Cyclub of trying to move behavioral health providers from generalists to specialists, because what happens is that there are these interventions that have been proven to be more effective at treating symptoms. We call them, as Patrick said, evidence-based, because there is evidence to support that they're more effective in treating. And really what we need to do is have providers using more what we call precision therapy, so we could do better matching. And that's our focus, is we want to get providers actually using these evidence-based interventions so that they're really giving the best care possible, which, by the way, also really helps for burnout, which is a huge issue right now for providers. And so we're very focused on that. And we give these behavioral health providers all the tools that they need to not only learn the intervention. So we have a very robust multimedia certification, from role plays to subject matter experts talking to each other. We do animations, games. We just try to keep it as engaging as possible so people don't get bored. But once they finish the course, they unlock a whole library of tools and resources to really hone their craft. So we give them ongoing learning opportunities, short little videos of key concepts that are part of that intervention, but then a whole bunch of tools, resources, and videos to share with their patient or their client, because we really want to engage that client through that process as well. And so we have little videos that reinforce whatever they're learning in therapy, those skills at home. They get homework activities and things like that. So we're just really focused on building up the experience for the member, making it better, making them feel like they're part of it, and having the therapist really use these evidence-based interventions, hone their craft. And then, as Patrick mentioned earlier, and then our big goal is to be able to start matching patients better to providers who are using these interventions that best match what their symptoms or diagnoses are.
Really great. And speaking of matchmaking and finding the right care for specific individuals, I'd love to segue into culturally competent care. Representative Kennedy, Cyclub has developed a lot of resources for mental health equity as of late. Can you share more about how you're addressing education around cultural competent care?
Well, Solomay, we're recording this on the one-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder at the hands of a white Minneapolis police officer who was convicted of murder. And because the pandemic had slowed everyone down, we as a nation were forced to sit with the reality of what that incident meant to millions of our fellow citizens who grew up having a different experience of policing than those of us who take for granted in the majority that policing is there to protect us. I can recall not long after this incident, I was talking to my friend Dan Gillison, who's CEO of NAMI, about his experiences having watched this George Floyd tape. And he really started tearing up, and he told me about his worry as a father watching his son go out, when he was growing up, and always wondering whether he was going to come back safe. And I think we're just in a watershed moment in terms of our understanding as a society about how much we have denied, essentially, systemic racism in so many areas, not just criminal justice, but in healthcare and education, certainly elsewhere in our society. And this is a moment for us to reconcile ourselves to the fact that we need to do a lot of work to address the impact of this historic racial trauma that's inflicted on so many vicariously, just because of what it represents as an existential crisis for people of color in our country. And what we're trying to do at Cyclub, what I've always tried to do, working with my great friend David Satcher at Morehouse School of Medicine, is understand that our fight for mental health equity is also a fight for equity more broadly speaking, because too many people have been subject to this racial trauma and have their mental health really afflicted by that in a way that many people might not appreciate. And so what Cyclub is doing is really acknowledging that what we need to do in mental health is be much more culturally sensitive and competent when it comes to the training of those clinicians who, are going to find invariably that many of their patients share a different cultural experience. And they have to have the cultural humility to know and recognize that maybe their framework of therapy may not be sufficient in and of itself to meeting their patient where their patient is. And we just have to really dig into this moment and talk to people about how do we create that therapist-patient relationship, which is so crucial to people getting better with the proper mental health care. There has to be that trusted relationship, and having that cultural humility will go a long way to establishing that therapeutic relationship.
And if you don't mind, I'd love to elaborate on that. What we did at Cyclub, we weren't totally sure of what would be the best way to handle this. We knew that we needed to make an impact on cultural humility, as Patrick said, but we weren't entirely sure how to do it because there are many different ways to approach it. And so we brought Arthur Evans, who's the CEO of American Psychological Association, and we had a convening. We brought all the payers, the national payers, together. We had Arthur facilitate it, and we literally did not have an agenda, Solomé. We just said, we want to talk about a few different ways that we could approach this, and we want to have an open dialogue about different ways that we could do it and hear from all of you, because we feel a responsibility, obviously, to get it right. And it was so fascinating what came of it is that, to Patrick's point, providers really just need to have the humility to be able to know that they don't know what someone's experience is like, and to be comfortable enough to have them open up and share what that experience is like. And there is no training, no matter what, that's out there that can help somebody understand what it's like to be in someone else's skin. So really the solution that we are developing right now is the humility to be able to ask someone to open up and to share what their experience is like. So we're doing a certification in cultural humility, and then we have our competency courses, which are not interventions, and we're doing those in different types of diversity so that there can be sort of like a quick baseline knowledge of different types of diversities, but nothing is going to ever be enough to share or to know what it's like to be someone else.
The approach of, especially as a real leader with such a huge platform, taking the approach of humility. At this point, Marjorie, Cyclub has hundreds and hundreds of partners, and you're doing amazing work with providers. Can you talk a little bit about some ways you're working with employers?
Yeah, so Cyclub really, we are so lucky, Solomay. I mean, I think Patrick and I, we just feel so grateful. We're just a little over 2 years old. We have over 700 partners, and we feel so honored that we get to be in this spot and that we get to, work with so many different groups. In addition to our behavioral health provider certifications, we also have our mental health ally certification, which is really just for everyday people. And so we have tons of companies, from large corporations to smaller nonprofits to governments to counties, that have our mental health ally hub. And in that, what we're doing is we're training people, and this goes back to what we were talking about access. There really are not enough licensed behavioral health providers to meet demand, but not everybody needs to see a licensed provider. So we're really focused on, how do we tee up people just so that we can be support systems for each other, for people that might not need a provider, but just might need to have someone to listen to. So our mental health ally certification it's 8 modules. There's a couple on mental health competency. There's one on substance use and opiates. We do one on suicide prevention, and then safety planning, how to talk to someone that might be suicidal, questions to ask. Same thing about intimate partner violence. We do diversity in mental health, where we talk about diversity, not just in color, but things, whether it's sexuality, we look at things like urban and rural, all kinds of things that one doesn't think about that we might have. We do unconscious bias too. So things that you might have a bias that you don't even realize. So we really break down bias and diversity in different ways. And then we do motivational interviewing, which is a really good, another evidence-based intervention, just to give everyday people skills to have hard, difficult conversations with some framework. And then we're developing right now crisis planning, how to manage someone in crisis, and then burnout and resiliency. So we have that. And then inside our mental health ally hub, we've got over 200 short animated videos. We have podcasts. We do a podcast with Columbia University called Ask the Expert. They have over 1,000 professors of, like, you name it. They have just experts in everything. And so we ask questions like, how do you parent a child with anxiety? Or how do you parent a child with ADHD? Or how do I manage effective tools for managing my depression? Or, how to manage an eating disorder. So we have all kinds of things, and we let them give advice. We don't love giving advice. So we have that. And then Patrick and I run a podcast called The Future Mental Health. So we have that in there, and we just have a lot of resources in there for employees. And the idea is to move online learning from, how typically you take a course and it's kind of one and done, and you might remember something, but by a couple weeks later, you barely retain anything. Cyclub really sees ourselves as a platform that you engage in frequently. Like, we want people in it every day, learning something new, or if it's 2 a.m. and they're thinking about something, that they can come in and learn. So that is what we have. And we have, thankfully, lots of employees there.
And can consumers also access this?
Yes, we have a free version as well, so anyone can come and access it. We have tons of free content for just anybody, and then and then there's a free version, and there's a paid version, and there's a custom version. So consumers can come in and get a free version on the platform, and then if they want more courses and continuing education and certifications, then that's paid. But for the free, we have over 200 videos that are free. And we're also, we have a very close partnership with YouTube. And so we also have a very robust YouTube platform as well that consumers can do.
Great. Marjorie, you alluded to the expertise that you've leveraged to develop all of this amazing content and resources. Representative Kennedy, you've got this amazing clinical advisory board. How are you making use of them, and what's their involvement in Cyclub?
Thank you, Solomay. You're right. It just I'm so humbled by the fact that we have every major payer in the country on our advisory board, the chief medical officers of all the major payers. And it's an exciting time for us to really engage with them about ways to really incentivize providers to adopt these trainings. You need to incentivize. So it's one thing to have great evidence-based materials, but how do we get them really have uptake of those? And of course, that's going to be up to the payers because they're going to have to determine how much of a priority to make this. And the nice thing is they're really making this a priority. They're also helping us think through ways that we can get some kind of standard common language and protocols in terms of tracking improvement of patients. There's a lot of agreement around the need for outcomes-based metrics, but there's a lot of confusion as to what are the best ways to accomplish this. And when you've got all the payers in the country on the same Zoom call, it really is productive for all of them to come to the realization that none of them can do it alone effectively, that if together they come up with some benchmarks that they can all agree on, it'll make life easier for all of them. And frankly, for all of us when it comes to standing up some standardized benchmarks we can all measure the improvement by. So that's why this advisory board is so important for our company on so many levels.
It's just amazing the ability your team has at Cyclub to bring all stakeholders to the table to make huge leaps and bounds in our space. Marjorie, can you talk about what's the greater vision for Cyclub?
Yeah, we really want to give people a place where they could have quality, credible information on mental health. And especially now with the pandemic and COVID, mental health is at the forefront. And for Patrick and I, who've been in this space for decades now, we couldn't be any more excited that people are paying attention. And with that comes a lot of noise. And so we really want to give people a spot where they can come learn. And it doesn't really matter who they are. It's so critical that people get the right information. Whether you're a consumer of mental health, you need to know that you got to see a provider who's using an evidence-based practice, or you want to see one that's collecting outcomes. And that's just so critical so that we know, is your care getting better? And at the same time, for providers, we want them learning how to use evidence-based interventions. And we want our, employees and our healthcare providers understanding and learning about this. We want to arm teachers so that they could learn about the best ways to support their kids, whether it's elementary, middle, high school, college. I mean, there's just a whole kind of universe out there that we need to train and tee up people. We're doing quite a bit right now with governments. We're in over 20 states in Medicaid, and it's just one of my favorite things because we actually get to train a lot of interns as they're getting their license. And so we feel good about the fact that we're kind of teeing up the next generation of providers, getting them to maybe, learn early how to kind of hone their craft and specialize. And then we're doing quite a bit in the commercial space. And so it's been an amazing journey. The ultimate vision for us is to have our registry where we have providers Cyclub certified in every zip code, and to make it just easier for people to get matched, to be able to, find providers that are trained to treat their symptoms and really just get people better help so that it can get through treatment more effectively. I don't know, Patrick, if you want to add on to that.
I think you summed it up beautifully.
Wonderful. Well, it's just incredible to see this amazing work, as I said. Thank you both for your time and expertise. Marjorie, Representative Kennedy, thanks so much for joining us today.